Zevachim, we have over here, is Lamed Daled 34. And we are starting today 5 lines in the bottom of Lamed Gimel Bet at Tanya Kavatei de Reish Lakish. There was a machloket yesterday, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, which we're going to review a good deal today. We'll repeat basically the whole thing, whole second Amud from yesterday, about whether a person who walks into the Beit HaMikdash, sorry, that's what we did yesterday, whether a person eats something that is basar kodesh, right? Whether that person is chayiv makot or not chayiv makot. So the Torah says, if they're tamei. So the Torah says, bechol kodesh lo tiga. Everything that's kodesh you shouldn't touch. Now, we learn that tiga does not mean touch. What does it mean? Don't eat. And this is what we discussed yesterday, that they can't be not eating. We're going to read from the Braita. So Tani Kavatei de Reish Lakish. It says in the pasuk, "B'chol kodesh lo tiga." Don't touch things that are kodesh if you're tamei. That's an azhara la'ochel. That's a prohibition of eating. This is more. What do you mean? This is the Braita. Ata omer azhara la'ochel. You say it means eating. Oino el l'nogea. It sounds like it should be touching. Talmud lomar. Therefore, we learn actually. If you read the whole pasuk, it says, "B'chol kodesh lo tiga ve'el hamikdash lo tavo." Don't touch that which is kodesh, and don't go into the Beit HaMikdash. To compare those two things. Makish kodesh lemikdash. We compare touching kodesh or eating kodesh to going into the Beit HaMikdash when you're tamei. Ma mikdash davar sheyesh bo netilat neshama. Av kodesh davar sheyesh bo netilat neshama. So too, I can. So basically, I'll read the words real quickly again so we could start, even though it's a little late. We are 5 lines in the bottom. I'm reading it quickly. Tani Kavatei de Reish Lakish is a Braita that supports the opinion yesterday of Reish Lakish that when it says B'chol kodesh lo tiga, it means if you're tamei, don't eat something that's kodesh. And if you do, you get a lotase of makot, not just a lotase, because it says B'chol kodesh lo tiga, that's an azhara la'ochel. That tells you you can't eat. Atom azhara la'ochel ino el nogea. You say it's for eating, maybe it just means touching it, like the Torah says. Talmud omer B'chol kodesh lo tiga ve'el hamikdash lo tavo. There's a second clause. Don't touch it, and don't go into the Beit HaMikdash if you're tamei. So we compare makish kodesh lemikdash, that the food is similar to the going into the Beit HaMikdash. Ma mikdash. Now turn the page. Davar sheyesh bo netilat neshama. Just like the mikdash, when we know the Torah says elsewhere that if a person is tamei and they walk into the Beit HaMikdash, they're chayav to lose their soul, which is karet. That's the punishment. So too, kodesh, when we talk about b'chol kodesh lo tiga, it means davar sheyesh bo netilat neshama. It means if you do it, you will lose your soul. And if it's talking about touching, literally, v'bin nogeya, second line, netilat neshama miika, is there karet when you touch something? We never find that. We only find karet by eating, ela ba'achila. And so therefore, b'chol kodesh lo tiga is referring to all kodesh don't eat, and that's the lotase that leads to karet. Says the Gemara now, third line. This is a continuation of the Braita. Sorry, this is not a continuation of the Braita. This is the Gemara's question. Vakati miboile, but still, according to Rava, how do you say from the word chol kodesh lo tiga that means don't eat it? What about a tamei shachal basar kodesh lifnei zrika? What about a tamei that ate something that's kodesh before zrika? Right. So now, if you eat something that's kachim, you're tamei. We are on the fourth line, hi James as well, on Daf Lamed Daled Amid Aleph. If a person is tamei and they eat basar kodesh, they are chayav alotase. Everyone agrees on that, and they are chayav karet. The Torah says. Reish Lakish yesterday said you also are chayav makot, and this was a discussion about how Reish Lakish knows that, and Rabbi Yochanan disagreed. The question we have now is, what about meat that was meant to be brought on the mizbeach but wasn't yet done properly? I mean, they shechted the animal, it became tamei. They didn't do zrika yet. And then they don't do shrika, they cancel it. They say, throw this away. And a person eats that when he's tamei or maybe when the meat's tamei. We'll see those two cases in a minute. Let's say when the person's tamei is a little bit simpler. So the person's tamei and they eat the basar lifnei zrika. Now, in some ways, that is considered not to be eating because it's not really food. The food is really meant to be, once it's sprinkled on the mizbeach, it becomes a carbon. Until that point, it is really in this in-between stage. It's not quite a regular carbon. So how do you know that case? And let's figure out the Braita, which actually talks about that, the Itmar, not a Braita, the statement. Fourth line from the top. Tamei sha'achal basar kodesh v'nei zrika. This specific case, a man is tamei, a kohen, let's say, is tamei. He walks in and he eats kachim, but it's not kachim that was done properly. It was basar of a carbon before they did zrika of the carbon. So Rish Lakish says lokeh. Rish Lakish says you get makot. Rabbi Yochanan says ain't a lokeh. That although it's prohibited, you don't get makot. Rish Lakish Amar lokeh. Why does Rish Lakish say you get makot? Because he understands that the pasuk bechol kodesh lo tiga, which remember the word tiga means touch, but Rish Lakish reads it as eat. All kodesh don't eat. Says Rish Lakish, that tells me loshna lifnei zrika, v'loshna lachar zrika. That tells you before zrika, meaning or after zrika, which is regular carbon, and before zrika. Now the question we're going to asking right now, but I'll finish the statement in a minute, is that if Rish Lakish uses that pasuk to tell me a lo taseh about eating it, how can he also use that pasuk to tell me that it means before zrika and after zrika, right? So how can you do two things from the same pasuk, basically? So that's Gemara's answer. Rabbi Yochanan says, though, in the Gemara, Eino lokeh. Why don't you get malkot? It's kedetani Bardal, like he taught yesterday from Bardal. This is yesterday's daf, if those recall, that he said in the name of Bardal, who was, I guess, an Amora, Tanasara, you quoted, that the pasuk is atya tum ato, right? It says the whole source of knowing that you can't eat something when you're tamei, that's kodesh, is from the word tumato. And when it says tumato, it's la'achar zrika. When it says the word tumato in tzav, it's after zrika. So therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, the prohibition is only limited to after zrika. Now that's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. But we're asking now, according to Rish Lakish, if the pasuk bechol kodesh lo tiga tells you that you get makot for eating basar tamei, how can it also tell you that you get makot whether it's the zrika or after zrika? And as Nava answered in Cain, because if the Torah was only telling you one thing, it would have said Lemakra Bikodesh. It said Bikodesh Lotiga. Why does it say Bichol Kodesh? Shma Mina Tarti. So the Kol Kodesh, all Kodesh, meaning whether it's before Zrika or after Zrika, you're Chayv. So that is the halacha of Rish Lakish. Now, says the Gemara Gufa, we are, sorry, online Gemara here, but we are around 10 lines from the top of Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, Gufa. Says the Gemara, an interesting question. It's a repetition. Gufa always means let's go back and discuss this in further detail. So the halacha that we discussed was tamei shachal b'sar kodesh lefnei zrika. A kohen tamei, let's say, it doesn't have to be a kohen, but let's just say a kohen tamei who eats kodesh from a carbon, but before they did zrika of that carbon. So Rish Lakish said lokeh, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Eina lokeh. Okay, that's an old machloket. Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish, who remember Israeli Amoraim, right? Amar Abaye, now comes along Abaye, who's very much in Bavel, and he said, machloket betumat haguf. The only machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish is if the person is tamei and the food is tahar. Aval betumat basar, but if the meat itself is tamei and it's before zrika, divrei alkol loke. Everyone agrees that if you eat it, you get makot. Why? The Amar Kra, because the Torah, when it says habasar, this is that we're quoting now from a Braita, when it says the word habasar, that anyone who eats basar that's tamei is chayav, we have a Braita that says lerabot eitzim ulevona lavnei achilaninu. It's not just basar. It's even if you eat wood that's meant to be on the mizbeach, right? Let's say you put it, I don't know why you would eat wood. Or levona, which are like spices, they're not really edible, right? They're just tavlin, they're just extra. Even things that are lav b'nei achila, afilu hachi rebinu kra. Even so, the Torah added those things. Rashi explains the concept is that because something called chibat kodesh, that your kodesh is so special and so holy that people might eat things that are kodesh even if they're not really edible. So you want to have, maybe that's the explanation, it's one explanation. You want to have such a connection to the things that are kodesh that you're willing to eat it even though it's really not an edible foodstuff. So therefore, says Abaya, because of that, you're eating a carbon before Zrika. Really, it's not yet edible for humans because you're really only supposed to eat a carbon after Zrika. But even though it's not quote unquote edible for humans, it's not different than wood or spices, and therefore that's why you're chayiv, if the thing is tamei. If you're tamei, then it's machloket. Rava says, I disagree. I think the opposite. Machloket betumat haguf, says Rava, machloket is if the person's tamei, whether eating meat that's before Zrika is considered eating meat or not.
Would it become tamei? No, I thought wood is not tamei. You wood on the sukkah, right? It does not mekabel tuma. So what are we talking about wood here?
So it's a really great question, but so it could be one of two things, right? So obviously the what's called the levona, of course, does become tamei. But the other, I mean, sorry, cut the screen. It would have to be wood, like you said, with the sukkah, right? Wood that his what's it called? Has a beit kibul, right? It's something that you put like a bowl, let's say, or something you put something in. So something like that. But in general, wood that is like sukkah wood, of course, does not mikabel tuma, as you said. So by those things, if the object is tamei, this is the Braita says that when you say habasar, it includes even things that are not really meat, that are not really edible. So that was the first opinion. The second opinion, sorry, I lost my place, apologize, is Rava, right? And Rava says the opposite of Abaya. Rava says machloket betumat haguf. Machloket Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan is if the kohen is tamei or the person eating the meat is tamei. Alva betumat basar, but if the basar is tamei, again, this is basar of a carbon before zrika. Divrei hakol eno loka. Everyone agrees that you don't get makot. The opposite, my taima. Kivan delo karina bay, because since you can't apply the pasuk that says v'tumato alav v'nichrata, you can't apply the pasuk that says that tuma is on it and you'll get karet, meaning because you don't get karet at that point. Lo karina bay, therefore we don't use the pasuk of abasar shiga b'chol tamei lo yochal. Because those psukim are essentially in the same, are compared to each other, because you really can't apply the karet to it because it's a fnei zrika. So therefore, you also don't have any lo taseh. Now you have a lo taseh, but you don't get makot for doing it because we learn makot from that place. Okay, so that's Rava's opinion. Now ask the Gemara, but
You
according
don't
to
get makot. So what is the punishment then? If it's a lo taseh?
I mean, there's many lo tasehs in the Torah that just God punishes the person, but Bezdin does not punish the person. Right. So remember, in order, again, this is we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I don't know who led it, but in order for us to punish someone by kachim, there has to be what's called an azhara and an onesh, right? Torah says don't do it, and if you do it, this thing happens to you. If you don't have those, the Torah says don't do something, it still can't do it. It's just that Beit Din will not be the ones who take out that punishment. So it will be completely in God's hands.
Well, that would be true for any lo taseh.
Correct. So that they're only arguing about whether in fact there's a specific addition here to add. You have to add a second level in order for us to give makot or
Right,
correct.
but if they did say that, if it's a person standing there and he says to them, "Don't do that. You're not supposed to eat it," and they give a general klal here that for this particular lav he doesn't get so makot. Then what does he get? I mean,
Nothing. He gets no punishment from people.
even if he was warned and he told and so forth and did it,
100%. There's no human punishment for every lotase, unless there's specifically lotases that are chayiv makot, but you have to have warning and all of that. But in this case, you would not be chayiv. The court would not be chayiv. He's definitely chayiv. So that's Rava's opinion. Now the question we have on Rava though is that you just said that if you eat tamei bozichin, right, tamei levona or wood, you're chayiv. How could that be considered something edible? Ask Rava Amar Mar, but what about the Braita which said habasar l'rabot eitzim levona? If you're telling me that eating meat before zrika is not considered to be that lotase, why is eating eitzim and levona a problem? Says more because there's a difference. Hachamayaskina, the time you're chayiv for eitzim levona is if it was in its final state, meaning it was hektish completely. Hachamayaskinan kigon shekadshil bekli. It's talking about where you took the wood or you took the levona and you put it in a kli sharet. The nase kemisha karvu kol matirav. Because once you put wood or levona into a kli sharet, it's as if you put it on the mizbeach essentially, which is the equivalent to an animal after zrika. Titznan, as we're going to have later in a Mishnah, not later, but in Masechah Me'ilah, kol sheyesh lo matirim, any food, this is talking about when something is no longer chayiv Me'ilah, but anything that has matirim, meaning there's things that you're supposed to do to finish off this carbon, then it doesn't lose its status of hektish until mishakarvu matirav, until you finish the process and do all the matirim. For example, with the carbon, until you burn the blood, or sprinkle the blood, sorry. But kol she'ein lo matirin, but an object that is not put on the mizbeach. Let's say you have something that wasn't, you make a donation to the Beit HaMikdash, you say, I want to give my table to the Beit HaMikdash, right? Or that's not kachay kachim, but I want to give wood to the Beit HaMikdash. There's no sacrifice you're giving from that wood. So says the Mishnah later, Misha Kadash Bikli, it is considered to be hektish until, meaning it's considered to be pre its use until you put in a kli sharet. But once you put in a kli sharet, it's finally done. And so therefore, meat before zrika is lower level than wood that's already put into a kli sharet. Now, Itmar, says Gemara, there's a
the wood has a higher level that is more kodesh than meat.
The wood, right, so that's why it's very surprising. But in this specific instance, correct, the wood or the bzichim of the thing would be a higher level of kedusha because you did everything you're supposed to do with them, meaning there's nothing left to do. So the meat is pre-zrika. So the basar, the fnei zrika, is still pending another act. And because of that, according to this reading of Rava, you're not chayiv makot because the pasuk of makot was specifically talking about things that have finished all of their actions.
Well, what is the action for the wood? No, you're not sacrificing wood.
Correct. So that's what the Mishnah Meila says, that if for things that you don't sacrifice, the action is when you put it in a kli sharet. So once you bring it to the Beit HaMikdash and you put it into the official pans of the Beit HaMikdash, it's considered to be brought completely.
Well, what do you do? I mean, so what's the point of that? You get no benefit from it. It's not a korban, it's not a chatat, it's not an asham, just wood.
Yeah, but people make dedications all the time. I mean, you could ask that about many, many things. It's true. A person says, I want to donate wood to the Beit HaMikdash. So from the moment that until you give it to the Beit HaMikdash, you can be chayiv me'ila, right? That's the me'ila question.
Why is it chayav mira?
Because he dedicated it to the Beit HaMikdash. And if you use something dedicated to Beit HaMikdash.
If he used it, okay.
Yeah, sorry. You're chayiv me'ila if you get personal benefit from it, correct.
Yeah, okay. Not if you just donate it. You have to
No, that's a mitzvah to donate it.
I understand that, but you say, I'm wondering why would he get
yeah, sorry, Mila's if he uses it.
Right. But once it's dedicated and donated, and I mean, they're burning wood without anything else just to keep the fire going. Okay. But so then what's the problem then? What's the law there?
If it's tamei and a person
wood is not wood there's not makabel tuma.
So you asked that already. If it's wood, let's say that has a beit kibul, there's a couple answers to that. But the simplest one is that it's wood that you actually had that could become tamei. The other possibility, of course, is that things that are in the Beit HaMikdash are much more susceptible to tumah than other things for the same reason that they're prohibited to eat. But in that case, if it's tamei and a person eats it, then they are chayav for eating something that's tamei, even though it's not meat. But we darshan it from the pasuk that says viha basar, which tells you not just basar, but the extra hay tells you even other things that are not food are considered to be pasul, and you would become be chayav a lo taseh for eating them.
Eating the wood.
Correct, or the lavona. Correct.
Lavona, okay, but wood. I don't think people can eat. First of all, wood in general is not makabel tuma. Secondly, people are going to swallow wood. How are they going to swallow the wood? One thing, even if they start to chew it, it's not going to get past their throat.
I don't know. I don't.
Well, of course you don't know because there's no answer to it.
Okay. So
are you eating or just using?
No, you're eating. You're eating the wood. It's a small piece of wood. I don't think it's. But okay, let's continue. Says the Gemara, Itmar. We are somewhere smack in the middle. It's only hard to give us a reference, but really around halfway down the page. Hama'aleh evarei behemat me'al gabim mizbeach. Now this is, we'll see a machloket Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, very similar, but a completely different case. Let's say a person takes the limbs, evarim, of a behemat tamei. Here, behemat tamei does not mean a tamei animal. It means a non-kosher animal. Rashi says like a horse or a camel. Okay, and you take it and you put it on the mizbeach. Reish Lakish says, Loka, you get makot. We'll see why in a second. Obviously, you're not supposed to do that, but you get makot. Rabbi Yochanan says, Ain't a loka. Rabbi Yochanan says, well, you're not supposed to do that. They're going to kick you out, but there's no makot. What's the machloket? Reish Lakish says, because look, if you read the pasuk in Parshat Vayikra, it says, Im behima, what's the pasuk? Im keves, im seh, right? If you have different, Rashi quotes the pasuk, sorry, that it says min bakar min hatzon takrivu, right? And so that tells you that you have to bring an animal. It's bakar and son. What's come to bakar and son? They're kosher animals, right? Cows, sheep. So therefore, the Torah says tehora bring a tahor animal, tmei alo. You can't bring a tamei animal. Now the Torah only says bring a tahor animal, kosher animal. So that's called a lav haba michlal asay, right? The asay is bring a kosher animal. The implication is don't bring a non-kosher animal. And a lav that comes out of an asay, lokin alav, you get makot for it. Rabbi Yochanan says ain lokin alav because Rabbi Yochanan says, although you're right, it is a lav haba michlal asay. My opinion is ain lokin alav, that you don't get makot for a lav haba michlal asay. Okay, that's machloket Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Motif Rabbi Yirmiyah, asked Rabbi Yirmiyah, what about the following pasuk? The pasuk says, and this is referring to a Braita, we're quoting a section of a Braita here, and the Braita says in Torah Kohanim about the pasuk about what you're allowed to eat. This is talking about the Shmini, when it says what a person can eat, not kodsha. And it says any animal that's mafreset parsa v'shosat shesa gida babehima oto tochelo. You should eat it, and we tell you that means you should eat a kosher animal, velo behemat me'ah. Don't eat a non-kosher animal. Don't eat a cow. Don't eat a horse. And it says the Braita, and this is a quote, Lav haba mechlal asay, right? So the Braita very clearly says that a lav haba mechlal asay is only an asay, not a lo tasay. You don't get makot for that. So that's a question on Reb Ish Lakish. Amar le Reb Yaakov le Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, says Reb Yaakov to Reb Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, Asbrelach. Let me explain to you what we're talking about here. The machloket Reb Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Be'evrei behemat me'ah. If you're taking limbs from a non-kosher animal, okay, a camel, the kuli amalo pligi, you're right. Everyone agrees that you don't get makot because the Torah alav b'machal say in that setting is not an asay, is not a lot asay. But ki pligi b'chaya, they're actually arguing about a behema that's kosher, but is a chaya. Remember, chaya is a undomesticated animal that could be kosher, right? So we're arguing, let's say a deer. They're arguing about a chaya. Rabbi Yochanan Omer over ba'aseh. Rabbi Yochanan says if you bring a chaya on the mizbeach, you're over an aseh, because a lava b'machal aseh is an aseh. And Rish Lakish in this case says ain't over below klum, right? So it's not like you had said earlier. Rish Lakish said you get makot. Rish Lakish said there's no prohibition at all. Now why is that? Rabbi Yochanan Omer over ba'aseh. Because the Torah says, bring a bakar v'tzon, which tells you bakar and tzon are behema in domesticated animals, yes, chaya lo. And a lava b'mechlal say is an asay. So the Torah says, bring a domestic kosher animal to the mizbeach. Implication is every other animal is puzzle, and you get an asay for not doing it. Rish Lakish says, "Eino over below klum," because ahula mitzvah. The Torah is just telling you what you're supposed to do. So you're supposed to do it, but it doesn't necessarily tell you that not doing that is specifically over an asay. Okay, that's Rish Lakish's opinion. Now, motiv Rava. Now, ask Rava from the following Braita, and this again is a little bit of a middle of a Braita. And the Braita says the following. Now we're quoting. Rava's quoting a Braita. Ilu nemar karban lashem behima. Right? If it had said in the Torah, remember the Torah says im bakar im tzon karban lashem. So now Rav is quoting a Braita which says, why does it use that word terminology? Sorry, it says, let me just, sorry, what Rashi quotes the whole pasuk. It says, no, well, we'll get there in a second. Okay, it says, if it just said, bring a karban lashem behema, it didn't say bakar and son, okay? So then says the Braita, Hayiti Omar would have said, well, karban lashem behema, when it says bring an animal to Hashem, it includes a chaya. It includes a wild animal. Because chaya bechla behema, sometimes in the Torah, a wild animal, an undomesticated animal, is included in the nomenclature of animal. Kinyan Shnamar, as it says, and this is a pasuk in Dvarim, it says, Zot behema asher tochelo, shor, sek, savim, seizim, ayal, v'tzvi, v'yachmar, right? Which an ayal and a tzvi, of course, are wild animals. So although the Torah says this is the animal you should eat, it includes wild animals. So therefore, says the Braita Talmud bakar v'tzon. Therefore, the Torah says, Mikola behemot, you should bring in behema in bakar v'tzon. Meaning, bakar v'tzon amarti lecha, I told you to bring as a karban domesticated animals, v'lo chaya, and not undomesticated animals. Continues the Braita, yachal lo yevi. Now, you might think the Torah is saying, don't bring it, but if you do it, it's not the end of the world. It's not ideal. It may be kasher. Maybe, in fact, if you bring a deer, it's kosher. Halamazeh doma, says the Braita, what would that be comparable to? To a situation that Talmid Shamar lo Rabbo, you have a student, a dependent person, whose teacher says to them, Havei lichitim, go to the store and bring me some wheat. Havei lo chitim musarim, he comes back with wheat and barley. So you would say, She'enu k'mavir al dvarav, he's not rejecting his teacher's saying, he's just adding, Ela mosif al dvarav, v'kasher. And the teacher might say to him, okay, good job, you brought what I asked for and something else. So maybe Hashem's saying, bring a cow or a goat, or a goat, and the person brings that and also a deer. Therefore, Talmud.
Why is that a problem? Because it's just that often the Gemara says Tani v'Shire doesn't list everything. So these are just examples of animals you bakar, a stone.
We're in the middle
you
of the
can bring any other kosher animal.
Wait, be patient. We're in the middle of the Braita, correct? Talmud Lomar, therefore, the Braita says, the pasuk says, bakar v'tzon. It doesn't just say the words zota behima, right? It says bakar v'tzon to tell you, bakar v'tzon amarti lecha. I specifically want you, says Hashem, to bring bakar v'tzon and not to bring chaya, v'lo chaya. Halamazeh doma, what is this comparable to, says the Braita in this second understanding? L'talmid shamar lo rabo, it's as if the master said to the student, al taveli ela chitin. Go to the store and I only want you to come home with chitin. and the student comes home, Avelo chitinu sorim. There, that's not a nice thing. You're not adding on to what he said. She'enu kemosif al dvarav, ela kema'avir al dvarav. Upasul. If you turn the page, Lamed Dalet Amud, and it would be pasul. And so you see very, very clearly from this Braita that when the Torah says, right, not to bring what's it called? Not when a person brings a behema or a chaya, sorry, not a behema, a chaya that's kosher on the mizbeach, it's not putter, it's not okay, it's actually in fact pasul, and it's not that the Torah is just saying it's a good idea to bring a behema. The Torah is saying you can only bring a behema, and so that is a tiyufta on Reish Lakish tiyufta.
But the Torah doesn't say that. Torah doesn't say al tavi chaya. It doesn't say that.
Correct, but that's how the Bright understands from the way the words are in the pasuk that's what it means.
But it doesn't say that.
Correct.
I mean, that's the question the Gemara raises. If you wanted to say this, then maybe it should have said al tavi chaya, but the Torah does not say that. Lo chaya doesn't say amarti lecha, but lo chaya doesn't. I mean, it doesn't say don't bring a chaya.
Right. So the Bright understands that because it says it twice, which is our understanding, that's telling you not only is it a good idea just to bring a bakar of its own, but you can only bring bakar of its own. So Rashi understands that it's from the Braita. I mean, the Braita clearly says it, right? What does the Braita mean? So Rashi understands it's from the repetition, that because it says it twice. Okay, continues the Mishnah now. We're at the 2 dots, and this was the discussion in the Mishnah that if a pasul accepted the blood, remember we said in the Mishnah that that's pasul, right? You can't bring that animal, that's not a kosher carbon, but if there's blood left, you can go back and do it. It says the Gemara, right? It's not good, but someone else can do it again. Asked Rish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan, a very interesting question, right? In a case where someone who is pasul accepted the dam from the animal and then sprinkled it on the mizbeach, okay? So if it was actually done, or maybe the pasul person sprinkled it on the mizbeach, ma'u sheyasa shirayim, does that turn the rest of the blood into what's called shirayim? Meaning, the fact that that person sprinkled on the mizbeach, does that prevent you from then using the rest of the blood to, remember we said earlier that if there's blood left and you spilled some of it on the floor, let's say, you can go back and try to gather some more of the blood and redo it. But if the person actually did the act and put it on the mizbeach, is that enough to make the blood that's remaining unfit to be used further on the mizbeach? And that's what shirayim. Shirayim literally means leftovers, but it's a negative term, meaning it's no longer usable, it's only the remainder. So Amar Lei, so Rabbi Yochanan, that was the question Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, right? So Amar Lei, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Ein oseh shirayim ela chutz l'zmanav v'chutz l'mkomo. Yeah. The only things that make shirayim are if you have a machshava chutz l'zmanu chutz l'mkomo. Can you guys hear me? Hopefully there's not too much background noise. Nav is going to quiet down. But so Rabbi Yochanan said to Rish Lakish that the only acts that if you do them, every blood that's left behind can no longer be used is if the act that you did was, say, sprinkling the blood on the mizbeach with a thought in mind that you're going to eat it or you're going to do something, burn it, chutz l'zmanu, chutz l'mkomo, which are, remember, the categories of pigul. One is asur karet, one is not. Ho meratzeli pigulo. Since those make an animal acceptable for pigul, they have an act. So it's basically the wrong person's accepted the blood, let's say. You sprinkled the blood on the mizbeach with a thought in mind that you're going to eat. I mixed cases. Let's say the right person accepted the blood. The Kohen took the blood, sprinkled it on the mizbeach with the thought that I'm going to eat the basar tomorrow, which is pigul, right? Chutz l'zmanu. In that case, you can't then go back and do it again, because the act of thinking of pigul was a definitive act and it made the whole carbon pasul, right? Because it's meratzela pigulo. But in this case, if let's say a pasul person sprinkled the blood on the mizbeach, that doesn't automatically make the rest of the blood pasul. And if there's some blood left behind, you can go get it and you can put it on the mizbeach. So that was the first version of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan's answer. Now, Rav Zvid Matni Hachi, that was the first version. Rav Zvid had another tradition, which is very different, where Ba'amine Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, that in this case, Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question. Let's say you have a kos pasul, right? Let's say you have a cup of blood that's pasul. So let's say a Kohen accepts the blood, and then he takes the blood with him and walks out and goes outside of the Azar to make a phone call. And obviously, remember, leaving the Azar makes the blood pasul. He walks back in with it 30 seconds later, and then he sprinkles it on the mizbeach. So does that act of sprinkling blood that's puzzle on the Mizbeach turn the rest of the blood in the animal into shirayim? Mao shiyaseh shirayim. Does that turn the rest of the blood into shirayim, which again, shirayim means leftover that can no longer be used. So there, that's not the same case. So there, Reb Yochanan said back to Reish Lakish, Amalei, well, psul gufei ma'asvirle. What do you think about a person who's puzzle who did it himself? Which was the other version of Reish Lakish's question. Ipsul mashvei shirayim. If the person being puzzle, let's say you use your left hand or you are Yisrael, and you put it on the mizbeach, makes the rest of the blood shirayim, then kos pasul nami mashvei shirayim. Then having blood that's puzzle also makes it shirayim. Ipsul lo mashvei shirayim. If a person puzzle doesn't make it shirayim, kos pasul nami lo mashvei shirayim. So basically, in this version, he didn't answer him, right? He basically said to him, it depends on what you think about the other case. So in one case, he answered him, in one case, he didn't. That's the second version. Rabbi Yirmiyah Midifti Matniach. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah Midifti had a whole other version of his teaching, but it involved different people. And this version was Ba'amine Rav Abaya Mirabba, right? That Abaya asked the question of his teacher Rabbah, and his question was similar to the second question of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, which is kos. Again, same thing. You have a kos, a cup of blood that you took outside of the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore became puzzle. You brought it back in. Mao shiyas. Sorry, this is not the same case. This is where you have two cups. I take it back. This kos is where you accepted the blood from the animal in two cups. Okay. The thinking was there's a lot of blood. Let's accept it. If we use one, we'll use it. We'll use the other. You can mix them. There's no problem with accepting blood in two cups. But let's say one person took one of the cups and went to the mizbeach and did the avodah on the mizbeach. What happens with the status of the blood in the other cup? Does that become, let me read the options, Mao shiyaset chavero dichoy o shirayim? Does it turn the other cup of blood into something that's called dichoy? Dichoy literally means pushed away, right? And therefore, meaning it's not even acceptable to be used on the Mizbeach at all. Or is it shirayim? If you recall, the Torah tells us that, remember what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to put some of the blood on the Mizbeach, and the remainder of the blood you pour on the bottom of the Mizbeach near the Yisod, right? We read it all the time in Musaf. Shiarei Adam, you pour on the Mizbeach. But this blood, is the second cup of blood considered to be shirayim, or is it, which would be poured on the Mizbeach at the bottom of the Mizbeach, or is it considered to be basically dichoy, meaning it's just not used? It was meant to be used on the Mizbeach, it's not used, and you just pour it out into the drain. Rashi says they had a drain in the Mizbeach, in the Beit HaMikdash, went out to the Amma, went out to the river, you would pour all the blood, which was probably a very...
What makes it shirayim? What makes it not usable? There's blood still in the animal. Why is that not? We learned yesterday, the day before, that any blood left in the animal can be used. If
You're asking about the earlier case. So the earlier case, the question was whether if a puzzle did something that makes it from basically it affects an act on the animal and says this whole animal is now kosher puzzle, and you can't use the rest of the blood in the animal. That was the original question that we asked. This question is not, the animal's not relevant, because here again, the question is you accepted the blood in two cups, right? And so the question then becomes, did you intend for both of those cups to be put on the Mizbeach? And when you put one on the Mizbeach, it basically invalidates the other one. Doesn't invalidate's a strong word. There's no validation. It just made it that you don't put it on the base of the Mizbeach, you pour it into the drain, which goes out straight out of the Beit HaMikdash. So that was his question.
But so why would the other, there are two cups, two separate cups. Why would the second cup not be usable? Why would...
So the thought might just be because you took the second cup in order to put it on the Mizbeach. You've already done it on the Mizbeach. There's no more need for that, right? So you can't put it on the Mizbeach. That's for sure not allowed. And so it basically was put aside for one thing and got not used for that. So we should just throw it away. We'll see. There's a Braita that discusses this. Amalei, so he said back to him.
So why did he take two cups then?
Just in case.
Okay, so then he doesn't need it. If he fulfilled his mitzvah, fulfilled
the question. Or do you pour it? So you definitely don't need it. The question is, do you pour it on the base of the mizbeach, like all the remainder of the blood in the animal, or do you pour it into the drain, which is dichoy, meaning it's pushed away, it's not even put on the mizbeach. So he answered him, Plukta Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon Rabbanan. In fact, this is a machloket in a Braita of Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon and the Rabbanan, the Tanya. And this is the Braita. The Braita says, it says Lamala, the Tanya, Lamala Omer, Lamala means earlier, it's 5 psukim earlier, in Parshat Vayikra, when it's talking about the Sa'ir of the Nasi, right, which is a certain kind of a chatat. It says, Et damo yishpoch, pour the blood of the mizbeach, of the animal, after you put it on the mizbeach, pour the remainder of the blood at the yisod HaMizbeach, on the base. Lamata Omer, but below, meaning 5 psukim lower in the Torah. Lamata is when you have a Torah, right, higher and lower. It says by the sa'ir of the regular karban of Yisrael, of a regular karban, ve'et kol damo yishpoch. Pour out all the blood. So one pasuk says et damo, and one says kol damo. So obviously that's a little different. So says the Braita, why is that different? What's the difference? Minayin the chatat. So how do you know that if let's say you have a karban chatat, shekibel dama ba'arba kosot, you accept the blood in 4 different cups, right? Again, you don't know which coin's going to fall, you don't know how much is going to come out, you bring 4 cups. V'natan matana achat mizeh, matana achat mizeh. And each coin wants a portion, right? I guess they would pay for the service. Each coin puts one, remember, a chatas is put on 4 corners of the mizbeach. So each coin gets to put one corner. Each one has one bucket of blood, and he puts one drop on the mizbeach. So how do you know shekulan nishpachin liyisod that the remainder in that container after the one drop is put on the mizbeach gets poured on the yisod? Talmud Omer v'etz kol damo yishpoch. That tells you that all of the blood that's left over after putting it on the mizbeach gets poured at the yisod. Okay, that's one. Yachol says the Braita natan arba matanot mikos echad. You might think, let's say you have 4 cups and one Kohen does all 4. You know, there's people like that. They run to the front, they do all the things. So one Kohen puts all 4 drops. The other 3 Kohanim are standing there like idiots with full buckets of blood. So what happens to those buckets? You might think, same thing. Put them all on the yisod. You might think Yeh kula nishbachim liyisod. They're all poured on the yisod. Talmud Omer v'et damo. It's only its blood, meaning its blood that was done on the mizbeach. The leftover blood gets poured on the yisod. But haketzad, hu nishbach liyisod. The one bucket that was used to put on the mizbeach gets put on the yisod. V'hei nishbachim la'amah. And they dump out their blood in the amma. Again, the amma means literally the stream, but the drain, the sink in the azar. So that's the Tanakama.
So the other 3 Kohanim poured out in the sink?
Sorry?
He said the other 3 Kohanim
Correct.
in the
The
sink?
other 3 Kohanim will put it on what's called the Amma. Yeah.
So there's only one Kohen is entitled to do the avodah. The other 3
I mean,
don't.
in this case, they'd have to go to the head Kohanim and discuss this afterwards, I think.
So what are they doing there then? If only one Kohen is allowed to do it, why are the other?
No one said one Kohen's allowed to. In this case, remember, one Kohen did it. So then the rest of the blood, because it was not used to put on the Mizbeach, you can't put it on the Yisod. That is the Tanakama's opinion. The Chachamim, we call them. Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon Omer, now the Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon is another Tana, argues, and he says, Minayin the chatat shekibel dama b'arba kosot. Let's say you have a carbon chatat where you accepted the blood with 4 different cups, so say 4 kohanim, but natan arba matanot mikos echad. You put all 4 from one kos, minayin that all of them shekulan nishbachin liyisod, that they can still all put their blood on the yisod. Talmud Omer v'et kol dimo yishpoch. It says all the blood, so you don't have to worry about it. All the blood of the animal. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? Achtiv et damo yishpoch. It says only its blood. The blood meaning that you put on the mizbeach. Amar Ravashi says Ravashi, but Rebbe Elazar Shimon would explain was ahulamute shirayim shebetzavar behima. That's referring to the shirayim that are tzavar behima, meaning the blood that you accept in the cups after the animal slaughter, that blood can all be poured on the yisod, even according to Rebbe Elazar Shimon, if none of it was put on the mizbeach. Why does the Torah say only the blood that's put on the mizbeach goes on the yisod? That means only the blood that was actually accepted that was out of the animal by the time you went to the mizbeach. What's left in the animal, blood that comes later, that blood is just dumped out into the drain. You don't put it on the yisod of the mizbeach. That's the machloket. Now continue the Mishnah. Last case.
Machloket between what and what? They're taking the blood from the animal. It's still kodesh blood, isn't it?
It's kodesh, but you don't put it on the yisod of the mizbeach.
Why not?
Because the pasuk says et damo. It's based on the pasuk. Pasuk says its blood, meaning the blood that you put on the mizbeach, gets put on the yisod. But if it's not blood that could be put on the mizbeach because it wasn't accepted in the kli, it doesn't get put on the yisod. That's the opinion of Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon. According to the Chachamim, none of the blood gets put on the yisod unless the actual container of blood was also put on the mizbeach. Okay, we're at the
first container.
Whatever container. If you had 2 containers, they both get put. 3 containers, 1 container. But if some of the blood in that container was put on the mizbeach, the rest of the blood in that container gets put on the yisod. If none of the blood in that container was put on the mizbeach, none of the blood gets put on the yisod from that container. So the next case in the Mishnah was kibel kasher v'natan lepasul. If a kosher person accepts the blood, but then hands it to a pasul, the Mishnah said, give it back to the kosher. And then we had a whole other case. If you accept it in your left hand and give it back to your right hand. We had a third case. If you're I forgot the third case. We'll get to it in a second. So it says the Gemara now, Tricha, we need to have all three cases. Diyashmina pasul, if you only said, if a pasul accepted the blood, you give it back to a kosher, right? Havamina would have thought, my pasul, what's a pasul? A tameh, right? Now, a tameh is a bad idea, but chazi, the avodat sibur. A tameh, sometimes a person who's tameh can work in the Beit HaMikdash. If everyone's tameh, right, then you're allowed to work. Aval small low, but the left hand is never kosher. You can never use the left hand. So maybe if you took the blood in your right hand and put it in your left hand, that's it. Game over. You can't put it back. V'yashmin small. So if the Mishnah then told me that, no, even if it's left hand, you could put it back in the right hand, I would say, well, sometimes once a year you have to use your left hand for avodah. When is that? The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, because he's got to walk into Kodesh HaKodashim holding coals and ketoret, and he only has two hands. So obviously one of them is the right hand and one's in the left hand. Itlei hachshara b'yom kippurim. Avo klei chol, but the third case was a klei chol, right? You put it from a kli sharet into a kli chol. Maybe once you do that, it's over. You can't put it back. V'yesh min kli chol. Now, if you said only kli chol, I would have thought we shouldn't chazal the kachinu. Although it's a kli chol, you can always say, I want to turn this into a kli sharet. You can't turn your left hand into your right hand. Avo hanach, well, you can't turn a tamei person automatically into a non-tamei. That's why we need all three. Says the Gemara, so why is it kosher though? Right? But why don't you say that once the blood was put into the left hand or into the klichol, it's pushed off? Why can you just go back and start as if nothing happened? This is where Rabbi Yirmiyah quoted Rava as saying, Hamani Chanana Mitzri. This, in fact, is the opinion of Chanana Mitzri, Deletle Dichuy, and Ditanya. And this is based on the following Braita. Says the Braita, Chanana Mitzri Omer. Now, this is a very interesting case. We're in the middle of a Braita. Rashi quotes the whole Braita, but this picking up a middle of a Braita about Yom Kippur. So remember on Yom Kippur, very important detail is you had to have two Seirim, and you would have to have a lot on them, right? You would separate Torah says bring two Seirim. One is called the Sa'ir LaShem, which is brought as a carbon inside the Beit HaMikdash, and the other is the Sa'ir LaAzazel, which gets sent out to the Azazel with the sins of the people. Now, let's say you put aside two animals, one Sa'ir LaShem, one Sa'ir LaAzazel, and then one of the animals dies. Can you use the second animal and just bring a partner? So one Tana says you can't. The second opinion of the Mishnah in Yuma is you can. It's not a problem. Then the Mishnah says, what if you shechted the animal and then the second animal died, or you lost the animal? So can you just bring another animal or not? Meaning, or do you have to start all over and do both karbanot? And the Tanakhama said you have to start all over. And this is where Chanana Mitzri says, Titania, now we're quoting, Chanana Mitzri Omer, no problem. Afilu dam bekos. Even if you already shechted the first animal and the blood is in a cup, mevi chavero mizaveglo. Bring another animal, say this is the partner, this is Sa'ir Lazazel, and therefore it's not a problem. So therefore, that's the Tan of our Mishnah, is that even though it was pushed off, right, because its partner died, and so the blood at that moment had no partner. So at that moment, there was no partner. It doesn't matter. It doesn't push it away. Go bring another partner, and you start over. You don't have to start over. I mean, you could start from there. Rav Ashi says you don't need to go so crazy. It doesn't need to be Chanana Mitzri, because you could say Kol Shebi Yado, anything that's in your ability to fix, Lo Havi Dichvoi. And here, putting an animal, a pot in your left hand, you can fix that very easily by putting it back in your right hand. And so therefore, it's not considered dichvoi. Amar Rav Shaya, which is a very interesting name, said Rav Shaya, Kavatei Rav Ashi Mistav. I actually like Rav Ashi because Man Shamalei Itle Dichuyim. Who is the Tana that learned in the Mishnah in Yuma that you do push it off? That if the animal died and the other blood's in the coast, you got to throw it away and start all over. Therefore, you push off. Once the animal died, the blood that's left in the coast doesn't have a partner, and therefore it's puzzle forever. That's Rav Yehuda. Ditznam, because the Mishnah says, now we're quoting the Mishnah in Yuma, V'od Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said that Nishpach Hadam, right, if the blood gets poured out and not put on the Mizbeach the way it's supposed to, Yamut HaMishtaleach. You have to get rid of the Sayar HaMishtaleach, meaning kill it, start over, and get two new animals and go from the beginning. And the opposite. Meta Mishtaleach Yishafech Hadam. And if the Mishtaleach dies, you throw away the blood, meaning you can't be like Chanana Mitzri said and keep going. And so clearly that's Rabbi Yehuda. Now we also know that Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol Shebiyado Lo Havi Dichoy, that anything that you can do is not considered Dichoy. Titania, what's the case? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and this gets to, we're going to get to this I think more tomorrow because it's late already, but there's a fascinating halacha that we had of Rabbi Yehuda in Masechet Pesachim. Now remember, when they brought the Pesach, they had thousands of animals, right? So the Beit HaMikdash was full of blood. And we're going to actually, we discussed, if you recall, in Masechet Psachim, that they would actually turn off the drains so that the blood would start pooling in the floor so everyone would know how much blood. It was like showing off how busy they were, right? And at the end, now the worry was that let's say someone slaughtered an animal and they dropped the cup of blood on the floor in the craziness. So says Rav Yehuda, you know what you're supposed to do? Take a big cup, put it on the floor of the Azara, pick up the blood, and zarko al gabe mizbeach, and put it on zarko zrika hakeneka yesod, and put it on the mizbeach. Because just in case someone's blood spilled, you can pick it up and put it on the mizbeach. Now, Shmamina, you see clearly from there that Kol Shebiyado, La'avidicho Shmamina. It's a very conclusive proof that according to Rabbi Yehuda, look, the fact that this blood spilled on the floor shouldn't make it puzzle because it's done. But says Rabbi Yehuda, the fact that we can then pick it up and use it makes it not dichoy. Says the Gemara, Gufa, let's just do this quickly. It'll be 2 minutes. It'll be very fast. 5 lines on the bottom. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda said, 4 lines on the bottom, Kos Echad. They would take one big cup of blood. It didn't have to be big. 1 cup of blood, they would take it from the blood that was mixed at the end of the morning of shechting the carbon pesach. Again, thousands of animals, blood all over the floor. They would pick up a tube of thing of blood and pour it on the mizbeach. If someone by mistake spilled all the blood out of their animal and had nothing left to bring on the mizbeach, that would kasher the animal. Amal Rabbi Yehuda, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, that's ridiculous. Maybe the blood didn't even get put in a kli. Remember, as we said earlier, if the blood spills on the floor of the azar, you can't pick it up. It's only if it got into a kli and you did Kabbalah and then the kli spilled on the floor, you can pick it up. So how do you know that the person did maybe the blood you're picking up from the floor was never accepted in the kli? Says Rabbi Yehuda, min nayadi. What do you mean? How would you know it wasn't accepted in the kli? Maybe, maybe not. Elashem alone it. We mean maybe it wasn't. Amar Lenzer, Rabbi Yehuda said to them, we're not worried about that. I only said that it helps you to pick up the blood. If you got it. Says the Gemara, well then how does he know? He gufa minayadi. How do you know that the animal of the carbon pesach that was messed up was accepted in the kli? And he answered, Kohanim srizinheim. Kohanim are very zars, and we know that they did it correctly. Okay, and so therefore we can be very confident that because the Kohanim are zrizim, that they did it properly. Vavdin haya, they did it quickly. Haya means quickly. Umishtabchin, but therefore it spilled on the floor from the cup, but it didn't spill from the animal directly, and therefore it's kosher. Ask the Gemara one more question. Ralo dam tamtzit muravbo. But if you get the blood from the floor, it's not just the dam hanefesh. There's 2 categories of dam. There's dam hanefesh, which is considered to be the original spurt of blood that's in the neck at the time of shechita, and then what's called dam tamtzit, which means blood that oozes out of an animal. That's really we think of as blood that comes after the death, that came out of the organs into the vessels. That's not kosher to be put on the mizbeach. Says the Gemara, well, according to Rav Yehuda, it's not a problem. Rav Yehuda the Tameh, Damar Dam Atzamtit Kriya Dam, because Rav Yehuda himself said that blood from that tamsit is called blood, and that of course is relevant if you eat it. The Tanya, as we learned in a bright, the Dama Tamsit, if you eat blood that is not the primary blood of the animal, but the secondary blood, Ba'azhara, the first Tana says you don't get karet for eating that blood. It's not real blood. It's not the full blood. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'karet. Rabbi Yehuda says you get karet. So therefore, they could bring the blood from the floor of the azara and they could put it on the mizbeach, and it would be a back fail in case anyone made a mistake in their carbon pesach and didn't get and then dropped all the blood. At the end of the day, we pick up some and put it on for everybody. It's a great solution. I am stopping there, even though it's not the end of the story, because tomorrow the Gemara is going to ask, what about the fact that it is a mixed in with other things, and therefore there's a chatzitza, and there are all kinds of other problems, and we'll discuss that tomorrow. God willing, we will start tomorrow at 7:45 a.m. Hope you can all join me and Nava. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you, Rebbe.